So, the digital story you just watched, A Town Called Denora, was created by freshman students back in 2012. It was one of the first digital stories my students ever made. And you could see, I don't know if you how you saw it on your screen, but it's been viewed by over 11,000 people just on YouTube. It's also been viewed by many, many more people than that because it's used by the Denora Area Historical Society and Smog Museum as a teaching tool. So when you walk into that museum, which it's on McCain Avenue in Denora, PA. When you walk in and you say to the guys that work there, there are two men run the historical society. Hey, tell us about this smog in 1948. What happened? They could do all kinds of things. They could show you the artifacts from that smog, the death records, the photos. They could show you all kinds of things. But instead, they say, do you have 4 minutes or 5 minutes? And they'll show you that digital story, which is always set up on an iPad in the front of the Historical Society. And so digital stories can have a very profound effect on people. You could read about this story of the Denora smog in a book. In fact, many books have been written about this. You could watch a full-length documentary on this. You could study this in an encyclopedia, in an article. You could learn about it in so many different ways. But why is it so impactful in digital storytelling form? The emotional content. So you do have some facts here, right? You've got 1948. You learn that there was some kind of deadly smog. And from the photos, you can discern all kinds of things that obviously people died. And we see that at the end where the list of the names of people that had died during the smog. But we also see people in masks. We see people at the grave sites. We see people in breathing tents. So we know based on the images in combination with the story itself, that's, these are the facts, but it's so emotional. Imagine the story without the music. It wouldn't be nearly as effective. Imagine this story without Corinne Dowlin's voice. That's who you hear speaking. She is now, by the way, has a master's degree and is off doing amazing things in her life since she was in my class all those years ago. And imagine this story without the photos, and it becomes a different thing. And so when we think about digital storytelling, it's really three stories in one. And those three stories either have to very intentionally match up, or you have to have a reason for one of them not to. There has to be a rhetorical purpose for one of those three stories not to match up. So the three stories are the narration, right? That's the sound of your voice, the sound of whoever's creating this. And obviously it's the words, but it's the sound of your voice. The soundtrack, and soundtrack doesn't have to just be limited to music. Silence is also a soundtrack. Pauses in your story. That is also part of the soundtrack. Sometimes people use ambient noise. But when you're thinking about creating your own digital story, be very cautious about the kind of sounds that you have in the background. Using songs that have lyrics is usually not a good idea because those lyrics then compete with the sound of your voice when you're talking. Using too many ambient noises, like sometimes people, like if someone's talking about someone being in the hospital or something, they'll have the ambulance noise, they'll have the heart monitor noise. So but it becomes a distraction. Every choice you make, think rhetorically about everything you're doing when you create your own digital story. Why are you using this song? Why is it appropriate to what you're doing? Does it fit the mood that you're trying to do? You wouldn't want to talk about something very serious in your digital story and have some kind of light music in the background, unless you're trying to make a point in that way. But generally speaking, those three tracks, the soundtrack, narration, and then, of course, the visual part, need to be working together to create a full story. And so years ago, video footage used to be used very sparingly in a digital story because of how big the file size was. And I know I sound like I'm a dinosaur from the dinosaur era or something, but we're talking even into, I don't know, 2009, 2010, you had to use like 10 seconds, 20 seconds. But these days you can use a little bit more if it's appropriate and if it fits in. So let's talk a little bit we've talked about the three strands of storytelling, but let's talk a little bit about the purpose of a digital story is. So if we think about what a story is in big letters, right? Story. It usually has a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? It you know this from somewhere in your English education or theater education that you have like a dramatic question, something that you're trying to answer, something that you might call it in other kinds of writing a hook or something that'll grab you, pull you in, right? And in a town called Denora, I believe Corinne's line was, the air was black and relentless. And immediately you think, what? What is she talking about? And it creates this tension. You want to create a tension early on in your story. And then somewhere along that path, and we like to think of it as an arc, but really an arc is not an appropriate way to talk about storytelling, except for at the very, very basic level, right? Because this rising action, where you've created the tension, the story, and this rising action that goes up to some kind of moment of change, it might not be at the top. It might not be this perfect bell curve, right? It could be that moment of change could be here. The moment of change could be over here in the story. And it really depends on the story that you're trying to tell. But there has to be some kind of moment of change, a crux, a tipping point, something, or it's not a story, it's just information. And so after that moment of change, then you have this falling action and your resolution. And the tricky thing about resolution in storytelling of any kind is that it might not be a complete answer. And I give you an example. So one of my favorite digital stories is about this young woman who has been told all her life that she almost certainly has a genetic disorder inherited through many, many generations in her family that will kill her before she's 35 years old, because that's been the what has happened in her family. And in the story, she tells us about this tension. And I think her first line is something like, I'm in the doctor's office waiting to see when I will die. And we see this, rise in action. And then her turning point is in that appointment where she's about to find out if she has the gene. She decides that she's not going to find out, that she just wants to live her life. And that's her resolution at the end. She says, today I'm going to go out and I'm going to go swimming and I'm going to pet my dog and I'm going to live my life. And if I end up having this disease, then I'll deal with it when it comes. But today I'm healthy, I'm fine, and I'm out there. And so we don't know, does she have it or not? She doesn't know either. But there is a resolution. And so when we think about telling this story and we go from, you know, I don't even want to call point A to point B, because storytelling is not this seamless thing. As you know, the best stories create tension and get us involved and make us want to listen and pay attention and find out, where does this go? Where is this turning point? And so when you think about telling your own story, and I know you're doing something different than I normally do with digital stories, and that's okay, because a lot of people in business use digital storytelling as a vehicle to talk to clients, and to talk to customers, depending on who you're talking to. And nonprofit organizations use digital storytelling also to tell their story. But the thing that you have to keep in mind is you're working on your story in terms of writing the script and figuring out in the end, it's what do you want your audience to feel? What do you want them to do when the video is over? Do you want them to write a check? Do you want them to say yes to your idea? Do you want them to feel like, they have seen the pain point? I mean, that's something that marketers talk about, like that what is the pain point to get somebody to buy the thing or to get somebody to invest in the idea or something like that. So you have to ask yourself that question. Is your story compelling enough, emotional enough, exciting enough, interesting enough for them after they have finished this story and they turned it off and it's over and you've said your last word and the music's faded out? Is it enough for you to get what you want and to get the desired result from the story that you just created and that you just showed? So, in the next video, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the wonderful program that is WeVideo. It's a web-based program, and I will teach you a little about how that program works, but thankfully they have wonderful tutorials. So I'm going to ask your professor to show you one more digital story so that you can get an idea of, not just one story, but another one about how this works. And pay attention to things like the things that we just talked about. And I hope you'll have a discussion since I'm not there to talk with you about this. But where is this tension, this hook, this dramatic question that's usually not in the form of a question, but it creates a question in the audience's mind? Where is this moment of change or this moment where something has happened, a crux, this point in the middle, somewhere in the middle. And maybe it's not right in the middle of the story, but somewhere in there. And then what is the resolution? And ultimately, when you finish this digital story, finish watching it, what do you feel? Did it do its job in eliciting an emotional response from you? And I know this sounds very, for lack of a better phrase, touchy-feely, but this is what you're trying to do with digital stories. So I'll be back in just a minute to talk with you a little bit about WeVideo.